I'd like to welcome you today to today's DAIReXNET webinar, Critical Economic Decisions When Raising Heifers. I'd like to first introduce myself. I'm Donna Amaral Phillips, Extension Dairy Specialist here at the University of Kentucky and the Project Team Leader for DAIReXNET. I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speaker today, Jason Karszes. Basically, he is a Senior Extension Associate specializing in farm management with a pro-dairy program at Cornell University. Previously, he was a farm management educator for Cornell Extension Service also. He has a bachelor's and a master's degree in farm management and production economics from Cornell University.
Thank you, Donna. We'll get started here over the next 40 minutes or so and highlight some of the things that we've looked at and we're continuing to look at associated with our dairy placement program of our dairy farms. So our goal of the replacement program, as we're thinking about raising the replacements, is to raise the highest quality heifer will maximize profits once she enters the lactating herd. So our focus is that this is an investment into our future profitability of the herd. And a quality heifer is one carrying no limitations into the dairy herd that would hinder ability to produce under that farm's management system, whether they're a grazer or high profit herd or whatever system may be. Excuse me. Profits are maximized by obtaining the highest quality heifer at the lowest possible cost. And we always focus on that quality first because that's our key emphasis of our replacement programs. So our key areas that we're going to touch on here this afternoon is the quality of the heifer, some of our key cost areas, the feed, labor, and non-performance, the number of heifers being raised, and then some discussion on how do we capture the value of excess heifers in terms of how many we are raising and what do we do with them. So the relationship with the dairy, we have a large impact on the performance of the dairy. These are the four areas we kind of touched on a little bit already. Quality, the investment, the daily cost, and the excess animals. We're running somewhere about a quarter of our expenses on our dairy farms are associated with raising replacement. And there's quite a bit of variation on that across farms. Quality is our first focus. Growth versus milk, one of our key questions. When they enter the herd, are they still growing or are they ready to make milk production? So now this is the growth rate, the targeted growth rate. Are we accomplishing the growth that we need to in the replacement program before they enter the herd? And then our calving problems. What happens once they enter the herd? And one of the key numbers we like to look at is what is the cull rate in the first 60 days of milk for those first lactation animals as a quality measure associated with the replacement program in terms of is it 0 or is it 10% or somewhere in between as it indicates issues with quality back to the heifer program. Are they too heavy, too light, generating those calving problems? Then what's the general condition of the animal? Our mastitis. How much mastitis do they have in first lactation, early in first lactation? Again, things carrying forward from the replacement program. What's their feet and legs? What injury may they have? Something that occurred to them while they're being raised that impacts their ability to produce in the dairy herd. And what prior treatments? How many of them were treated? What were they treated for? How may that impact their longevity or production in the dairy herd? And what we like to look at is what we call our replacement heifer management snapshot. There's different information out there. One of those things in the resource rule is the Dairy Heifer and Calf Association Gold Standards. And that's another resource on the quality of the replacement. But on our snapshot, this is some of the information that we're challenging the dairy producers, asking the dairy producers to look at, to start measuring, to keep track of their records, to start trying to quantify or measure the quality of their replacement program. At least here in New York, as we work with dairy farms, the ability of the farmers to answer these types of questions has been a challenge in terms of getting accurate information, or very easy for them to look at. And some of these things take quite a bit of time. over the years to look at. And some of our key numbers that we look at to try to assess the quality of the heifer. And with some of the growth research data that Dr. Mike Van Amberg and others have done in terms, and Dr. Mike Overton, with the growth and the value of that milk production in the herd, it appears to be difficult that we can never raise a heifer low enough cost-wise to offset some of these quality issues. So the quality of the replacement, if we look at it in an economic sense, is the net present value of their earnings in the herd. The higher the quality, the higher the value. So the more milk they make in the first lactation, how many of them start second lactation, what is their milk production at second, third lactation, all those things generate the value of being a higher quality animal. And then what is the current quality of the replacement? Back to that snapshot has been one of our key questions. How do we know what the quality of our heifers are being raised? What improvements can we make in the system? What value do those improvements have? And the value of scales on the farms and the values of this information, being tracked to start answering some of those questions is a key part, the key economic decision on our farms. Even though we don't have a very good model yet in place to say on this farm, if we improve the quality of heifer, this is what it means. And that's an interesting question. It's not yet do we have a model to answer that. The areas impacting the quality, the overcrowding on the farms, how many heifers are in the facilities versus what they were designed for, what type of facilities are they in terms of the ventilation, the cleanliness, the comfort areas, stalls, those types of things. The nutrition program, what is being fed, how the animals are being raised, and how that supports or allows the growth, desired growth to occur. And then the overall management is what in terms of heat detection, reproduction, vaccination type program to support the generation of quality animal out at the end of the program or out of the program. So as I mentioned earlier, about 25%, 20 to 30% of our cost to operate the business is our replacement program. It is an investment in the asset. This is somewhat unique in the dairy industry where 25% or so of our money that we write a check for every day is going to something that shows up on the balance sheet, i.e. our animals, our future production animals. So it is an investment, and there are direct and indirect costs. So the key question after quality, second key point is what's the cost for us to raise these dairy replacements? So what is the cost? And this is always interesting discussion for those that are out on farms. Are they free? Just to purchase feed, just to hire labor, we just stick them in the whatever corner we have, or as we'd like to approach it, some of all our inputs, cash and non-cash, the fixed costs associated with the investments, the opportunity cost of the capital. If we're treating these animals as an investment, every day I invest money into them, I cannot use that money to pay off the bank or do something else. We have an opportunity cost there, and then we have an economic charge for animals not completing the replacement program. These are animals that started, we invested money into them, and for whatever reason, they did not enter the dairy herd. So they either died or they were sold as non-performers. What was the charge for not finishing the program? The reported cost to raise dairy replacements, this isn't a new topic. So if we look back over time, the earliest study I was able to find was 1973. It was $617, and then they did some more studies, and then here's some additional studies that have been done at different states at different time frames, and what the costs have been to raise the heifers. And then here's in New York in the last couple studies showing what has occurred with the cost to raise heifers in New York since 1990. So we can kind of see what these costs are And what's interesting is you see the various years with these costs and how do they compare to the cost of what you could buy a spraying heifer for during those same time frames, those same years. And over a number of years that we've done this, the cost to raise the heifer has been equal to or greater than the cost that we could sell them for. So what is the cost? It's hard to know. The average is, at least here in the Northeast, many of our farms do not keep the detailed records in their systems to accurately track the replacement program versus the crop program versus the dairy program, etc. So we kind of use a study approach every 5 years to look at the costs. And we usually have about 17 farms that are in the study, and that's what we did at this time. And it's a descriptive study. It's not a representative sample, at least what's occurring on these 17 farms. And we're looking at birth to calving, and we're collecting the data. In this particular case, it was over the 3-month third quarter of 2012, and we were looking at all the input costs and usage levels over those 2 to 3 months. And then a key assumption here is the prices and input usage would stay the same over 24 months or 23.3, whatever the calving age was, to develop the cost of the heifer. So here's some of the selected and descriptive measures of the animals or other farms that participated in their heifer raising cost project here in this last time, 2012. Average 636 heifers. And then we had the 80th percentile range, so it's not the full min and max given the data set size, but a pretty descriptive range in terms of where 80% of the data fell. Average calving age was 23.1 months. Calving at just over 1,300 pounds and gaining about 1,163 pounds on the farm. With the daily rate of gain of 1.74, and then here is the non-completion rate for this group. So the average was about 10.6% of the heifers that started the system did not finish the program, so they were sold as non-performers or died. This does not include heifers that were marketed to other dairy farms as replacements. Then with the range on the non-completion rate, 4% up to 17.66%. So here's our cost per day per animal. And if we start up here, and this is for all the animals completing the system, and feed is the largest expense, no surprise there. It's at about 53.3% of the total expense is in our feed category, and this is purchase feed plus grown feed. And the farms are using their estimated cost to grow their forages, so it's not a market value for the forages unless they were buying them, and then what they actually spent. But all their grown feed, they're putting in their estimates or their number approach to come up with the cost to grow the feed. Labor was the second largest expense at 12% of the total, 35.8 cents a day per heifer was for our labor. And those two costs are about 65% of our total cost to raise heifers in those two numbers. And the third expense, if everybody noticed it, and it's always an interesting question to ask dairy producers, what is the third largest? Because no one usually ever comes up with interest on daily investment. But seeing we've got an asset, we're investing in the value of the animal, that money is tied up. In this case, we use a 7% opportunity cost on capital. So at 6.8% is our second largest expense. The third largest, associated with raising the heifers is the opportunity cost for the value tied up in the amount or the cash tied up with the animal. You see the other key numbers, the bedding, the health, the breeding, our other key variable input costs. Then we have our machinery and building operation and ownership. So this is where the fuel usage shows up, the repair costs, the ownership costs for the machinery and equipment. That's where those are showing up. Do we have to account for manure spreading? Where is that manure going? How much it costs to spread it? And then we have our non-performance expense associated with those animals that start the system and did not finish it. And I just noticed that we did have a little formatting area here where we have 125 and 165. That wouldn't be correct, obviously, on the cost per day per heifer on that interest. Sorry about that. And then there's all our other costs, which are our trucking, insurance, the custom boarding for those farms that use that, and any professional fees. So our total cost per day per animal, right at $3 per day, and this is our economic cost, not what we write checks for at a given day. And that leads to a $2,090 investment into the animal while she's on the herd. And if we count a value of $150 for when she's born, that now generates $2,238 of our economic investment in the animal, including value when she enters the dairy herd. And our 80th percentile range is $2,026 to $2,413. It's a significant investment area, and at least right now in the Northeast, these costs are higher than what we can sell spring age heifers or even first lactation heifers for. We break down some of the costs in a little bit more detail. Here's our feeding. And now this is a little bit different rate of gain than we saw before, because this is only when the animals were on farm, to account for the farms that did custom grow, use a custom grower for a small percentage of their heifers. And so there's our daily rate of gain. Average dry matter intake is 15 pounds, ranging from 12 to 19 for the dry matter intake over their life. Feed conversion, another key number that impacts our cost, is 0.12. That's pounds of gain per pound of dry matter, and 0.09 to 0.15. And then our feed cost per pound. We have a key number, 7.2 cents per pound of dry matter, ranging from 9 cents to 14, just over 14 cents. If we look at grown versus purchase feed, and this is all the way back to while they're on calves. So if they're using whole milk produced on the farm, that's counted as a grown feed. Milk replaced would be purchase feed. So we're 63.5% grown, 36.5% purchased, and then we can kind of see the range of the grown and the purchase feed. The second key cost area was labor. And a key number that we calculate is labor efficiency, and we use heifers per weighted daily labor hour, heifers per hour of labor. And what this is the labor hours that they spent taking care of their heifers over multiple days, multiple weeks. How much does that equate or calculate out to on a per day basis versus what the average number of heifers. So it's how many heifers can be taken care of in one labor hour. The average is 39.4, ranging from 26.4 to 57.6. So one of our larger ranges, over 100% variability across these 17 farms, is the labor efficiency side. And then we have the pounds gained per weighted daily hour, another way to measure that, similar relationship. Our cost per day, 37.8 cents, 21 cents to 51 cents. So again, over 100% variation in our range on our second largest expense. The very bottom is our cost per hired worker. How much are we spending on for the employees doing the work? And this is all costs associated with labor, so not only their W-2s, but FICA, Social Security, workers' compensation, health insurance, retirement, any and all things the farms are writing expenses for, writing checks for, is trying to be captured in these labor costs. And these two numbers right in here are our labor efficiency numbers, pre-weaned and post-weaned. So while they're on liquid feed in the calf pens, individual hutches, calf farms, whatever they may be, we're average 11.6 heifers per labor hour, and range from 6.2 to 21.7. And on the post-weaned heifers, the average was 59, but it ranged 38.8 to 102. So large range on both of these numbers for that labor efficiency. These are two critical areas. Labor is one area that management can have an impact on, impacting the costs to raise the heifers, along with maintaining or improving quality. So that was the average cost per day, per animal or per pound. The other interesting thing to look at is how do our costs change on a per day basis based on the age of the animals over time or over the year. The farmers provide us data by pen of animals as they move through their farms, and that allows us to look at how their costs change as the animals got older. So here, if we use the per day line, which is the dark blue line with circles up on the top, this is the liquid feed spot. So we're approaching $6.50 per heifer per day for economic costs while they're on liquid feed. So this is getting us up to that 8, 7, 8 type weeks of age. And then as the animals are weaned off of liquid feed on the solid feed, and then also into group housing systems, then in the free stalls, we see the costs drop down drastically. So as we get into 17, 20 age animals, we're below $2.50. Getting down to about $2 a day, which we stay fairly consistent. And then we start rising and have a little flip here in the 53, 57 age weeks. And this is where our breeding is occurring. And some of the costs associated with the breeding of the animals. Plus the animals are getting larger and the feed costs start increasing, which we'll see shortly. And then it's a steady, slow increase until we have these blips here at the end. And this is when the animals are entering the herd, and they have entered the calving pen areas, the pre-fresh areas where the ration costs change and the bedding changes and the size of the groups change. So that's what led to these increases here at the end. And the lower line is on a per pound and gain basis, which we can see there. Now on these farms, some of the farms do have scales, so we had very accurate rate of gain and pound information. Other farms use tapes to get begin and end weight, and there might be some more estimation of weights as they move between pens, but at least use that method to come up with the weights if they did not have scales. Feed, as we said, is the largest, 53%. Some of the key factors that were impacting feed costs on the farms. Number one was forage quality. What was the quality of the grown forages that they're feeding the heifers? Was it the right quality for what the heifers needed for the rations to meet the nutritionist and the feeding goals? Second one was time on feed, i.e. the calving age. If we calve them older, they are going to be around eating longer, leading to an overall total feed cost, even though the ration cost per day might be lower than just eating more. The dry matter intake, how much are they eating over time, tied back to that time on feed potentially also. And then what's our feed conversion? And that ties to the forage quality, to the nutrition, to the housing systems, and all these other areas that intake feed conversion. So some of those are the key factors that led to some of the variation in the feed cost. So here is the feed cost. In this graph, as expected thing is over half our total cost, follows total cost graph fairly closely. While we're on liquid feed, we were up here in the 360 range per day for just feed costs. We dropped down in the $1.20 to $1.25 range, and we stay fairly consistent in that area until we get to the breeding age, and then we start increasing at a fairly steady rate. We get up to the $1.65 type area as they get closer to calving, and then once we move into the calving pens, and under the pre-pressure rations, whatever the farm may choose, our feed costs bump up. So that's how the feed costs have changed on these farms as they're raising the heifers. Cost per pound of dry matter is one of those key measures we like to look at. Here's the 17 farms. Cost per pound of dry matter across the bottom, cost per heifer. And this is the feed cost going on the vertical axis. And there's the data of the various farms with an R-squared of 0.07. So the actual cost that the farms had used for their cost per pound of dry matter, ranging from about 9 cents to 16 cents, did not change our feed cost too much in a significant manner. Here's our dry matter intake, ranging from just over 10 to almost 20 pounds of dry matter, average over their whole life on the farm. And our feed cost for heifer again on the vertical axis. Now we have an R-squared of 0.63. How much they're eating significantly impacts this number. The important part with this is realizing this is strictly a cost number, not a quality number, and trying to capture the difference in the quality of the animals, saying I'm going to spend more money to grow them right. I might be on the higher intake side here, higher feed costs here, but they'll pay a return to me. Our goal isn't the lowest cost animal, it's the highest quality animal at the lowest cost possible. And then here's the feed conversion, and it's R-squared is 0.51. As our feeding conversion increased, our feed cost came down. Labor is our second largest expense. 12% of the total, $150 to $350 per heifer completing the system. So over $200 range, driven by the labor efficiency, less than 30 heifers per labor hour to greater than 55 heifers per labor hour. What can we do to improve labor efficiency on the farm? Facilities is the key area that appears in the studies, and it's appeared each of the studies here the last 4 times we've done it over the 20 years. Large influence, where's the location of the facilities? Where this is important is how often do we have to be moving ourselves, our employees, to manage them? How often are we moving feed? How often do we have to move the animals? One of the quick checks I do on labor costs on farms is how many times do they get on a trailer before they calve? And we have farms that are approached 9 times they're loaded on a trailer to be moved around before they calve and enter the herd. And every time we move them, there's labor hours associated with that. Bedding type, size of pen, and the animal handling setup in the facility also all impact the labor efficiency. Here's our labor cost by age again. On the wet feed, $1.50 range. Once we get them in the larger group housing systems or group housing and onto dry feed, our costs come down, bottom out in about the 20 cents per head per day range. And they stay there until we get through breeding, and then right here before we calve, we drop down closer to 15 cents in the larger pens, free stalls generally, and then our labor costs go up when they enter the pre-fresh areas. Labor efficiency is the driving factor. If we look at the labor efficiency across the bottom, 20 to 60 heifers per labor hour is the range, so about 25 to 60 for the farms. And we look at the cost per heifer on the vertical axis, and R-squared of 0.62. How can we improve labor efficiency on our farms? A key economic management question. The third part of the cost side was the non-completion. How the expense associated with animals that start the system and don't complete it. Died and sold as non-performers. We allocate those expenses, those losses, across the animals that actually do complete the system. And we have a key relationship to quality here. As we have a higher non-completion rate, why are those animals dying or being sold? Is our key management question. We look at the non-completion cost per heifer. That's here on the vertical axis. So on the participating farms, you range from just about less than $20 per heifer completing it, and then we're up to $120. And here's our non-completion rate. And the R-squared is very high, as we'd expected. And the key point here is it can be difficult to calculate our cost per heifer for non-completion, but if we can come up with the non-completion rate as a snapshot of what has occurred over the last 2 years, that gives us an idea of what this cost may be. Now the problem with the challenge with the non-completion rate, it is not a monitoring tool that we can use for day-to-day decision making, because it takes so long to analyze their complete, because it's how many heifers started the system and actually enter the herd 2 years later. So it's a macro measure for strategic analysis, not a measure we look at for making day-to-day decisions. It is one that gives us a good idea of what has occurred, at least in the dairy and replacement program, what other questions we may need to ask. Number of heifers being raised is our next key economic spot question that we look at on the dairy farms. And the first part is, what's the quality impact? What's the overcrowding? And we like to ask the question, what number of heifers was the system designed for? A very common management decision is we'll just stick the heifers wherever. We can overcrowd them, they're not producing milk. Doesn't really have much impact on us, plus it potentially can lower our costs because we're spreading those investment costs over more heifers. The concern becomes is what happens to the quality of all the heifers in the system. The second area with the numbers being raised is the investment level for our buildings, for our machinery, for our manure storage, for our land associated with producing feed. How much money do I have tied up in things associated with raising heifers? And the more heifers I raise, the more investment I have in those areas to manage them, to raise them, house them, etc. Some of the other key questions: what's the future plans of the dairy? Where are we growing? Where are we going to add them? What's the growth or expansion plans? How do we capture the value of the excess heifers? If we're doing a good job within our dairy, we're generating a high number of calvings across the herd, we're going to have more heifer calves, and we probably need to maintain herd size. What are we going to do with them? When should they be sold? Should they even be raised? Are two key questions, two management topics that are approached differently by farms, or at least questions to be asked. Once the question's asked, when should they be sold, or should they even be raised, that leads to the next question of how do we decide which ones to raise or not raise, or who to sell. But the work being done on the genomic side, providing more information to help answer that question. But the genetic side, the family history, the dam history, how have the siblings and the dam done in the herd, and then what environmental conditions, growth and illness, where's my scales and where's my records. If we go back to the quality snapshot or the professional heifer or the dairy calf heifer association's gold standard, what does this information provide us when we evaluate the animal to say who met the growth guidelines for percent mature equivalent, who was treated with antibiotics for pneumonia as an example, or whatever else they might be treated for. If I need to choose which animals I sell, I mark it as excess, or don't continue to raise versus enter the herd, how can I use the genetic information along with the environmental conditions to help answer that question? So here's a chart updated some charts that had been put out. Bill Menzie with Cornell Crop Extension was the first one that I had seen. Around modification of the calculations, but same concept for a herd of 100 cows up here with a non-completion rate of 8%. So we're saying for every 100 heifers that start the system, 92 will enter the dairy herd. So that's what we're using for our non-completion rate, a little lower than the average of this last study, which is 10. Here's our cow replacement rate, or cull rate, 20% to 45% of the herd will be turned over. And here's our calving age, 18 to 32 months. And then these numbers here in the center section is what percent cows to heifers do we need to, seeing I used a 100 cow herd, to maintain herd size with those assumptions. So if I have a herd with 33% cull rate and a 24-month calving age, they need 69% heifers to cows. If we jump to 36% cull rate, they're at 75. Approaching 40% cull rate, 39%, we get to 81 at the 24-month calving age. Looking at our data here in New York, a lot of our farms and our average out of the Dairy Farm Business Summary is right around 86%. So on our herds here in New York State, 86% heifers to cows, they're kind of running in this kind of line right in here in terms of we can maintain higher cull rates or our calves are really old. But either of those, especially at the higher cull rates, is that the best management choice, the best way to capture the value of the heifers? What else could we potentially be doing with heifers growth or selling them or not raising them as a management question associated with the replacement program? And the last part here is how do we try to look at the total economic impact associated with the replacement program with the overall dairy? So what is the relationship, and what approach we take is we're setting a base year. We're going to treat the heifer enterprise as a separate business. We're going to set a budget for the dairy to buy heifers. They're going to spend so much per heifer to purchase the animals. And we're going to look at the current enterprise performance, project changes, and then how does this look after we make these changes in performance? Say, how could we potentially change the bottom line performance of the dairy by making changes in the replacement program? So our base scenario that I started with, just to set the stage, the 300 cow dairy, not growing, 36% average cull rate. They're going to budget $1,700 to buy the replacements back from their enterprise. They're going to sell the calves for $150. The cost per day cash costs are $230. So you recognize this is lower than the $299 because this is more of a cash cost, not an economic charge. Currently, they're at 27 months calving age, and they have about $700 per heifer invested in facilities and machinery associated to take care of the heifers. That's the base scenario. Oh, excuse me, and the heifer cull rate per year was 7%. So if we look at the statistics that we calculate for this herd, they're raising 264 heifers. So that 300 cow herd to maintain herd size, that's how many they have to raise. Their cost per day per heifer is $2.72. Still not close to the total economic cost, but we at least bring in depreciation and performance. Total cost of the animal is $2,236. And calculating a net enterprise income for this business, it's minus $72,000. Total investment in the enterprise, buildings, machinery, and the value of the heifers of all ages spread throughout the system was $519,000, giving us a return on investment of minus 13.9%. Excuse me. Now, we can change the base year to change these numbers here it's important not to get hung up on these numbers saying this is representative of all farms or what's occurring across all the dairy industry, but it sets us a base to give us the change, and that's what's more important here in this upcoming slide. And the overall dairy business return was 7.7%. So changes that can be made to the herd, we can improve the quality of the animal. Say we're going to grow them better, they're going to have a higher milk production and longer lifetime in the herd, and that's going to equate to the dairy paying us $200 more or having $200 more value. We can lower raising costs by 5 cents a day. You can decrease calving age by 4 months, 27 down to 23. We can decrease number needed due to the dairy cull rate. Say, what if we run 32% versus 36 by average through management changes? Better management in the heifer replacement system, lower the cull rate from 7 to 2.5. We're going to sell excess heifers for $1,700. Well, we do all these things. And as we make these individual changes, how can the model change or how can our returns change? So here's a summary table. And here was the base year. And there was the returns. And let's focus on these kind of two columns. The number raised as we made changes goes from 264 down to a low of 189, all the maintained herd size. And then if we're still selling excess, we're at 237. Here how the enterprise has changed. Each one of these is making an individual change. So by decreased calving age 4 months from 27 to 23, we went from minus 13% to minus 10% return. Again, don't get hung up on the actual numbers as it's the change. How much did we improve? The heifer cull rate, you can see those changes, the premium paid. But now if we can do them all, and we set up our replacement program only to raise 189 heifers, we only have investment for 189 heifers, now we can get almost to zero in this model or this estimation. Now if I still have the existing barns that I have to pay for, we're at 1.86 negative. And then if I'm still going to raise all my heifers, but now I'm going to sell the ones I don't need, we're essentially still -2 or get a little worse because we're selling them at 1,700, which is still less than our cost to grow the heifer. Now we can see what improvement potentially we can make in the replacement enterprise by management changes within or the dairy cull rate outside the replacement program. Now this slide ties it back to the dairy farm. And here's the dairy farm's net farm income for the 300 cow dairy with their profit and such before heifer expenses, and then the heifer expenses are accounted for. Here's the total investment on the dairy farm. And we notice how this changes, $2.76 million, drops down to $2.579, then back up to $2.684. This should have been $2.636. Sorry for that second typo. And there's our range of our total investment, and that investment change is based on the number of heifers being raised and the facilities needed. Here was the base return on the dairy, and the percent heifers to cows, and we see how those numbers both change. In this particular example, as we made these changes in the replacement program, improved the overall earnings of the dairy farm while decreasing the heifers to cows. Summary here. Replacement program impacts overall farm performance. Some of the difference on our farms with the replacement program or with their return on investment, return on equity is due to the replacement program. Quality is the key focus. We have a poor animal enter the dairy herd, leaves in the first 60 days, leaves before second lactation, lower milk production, then we can never raise them cheap enough. Feed and labor are our two largest cost areas. That's where we'll start whenever we look at a replacement program. Those are our key questions. Management focus is try to minimize non-performance expenses. Why did an animal leave the herd as a non-performer, and what can we do to change from that occurring again? And how many heifers are we going to raise? It impacts our investment, impacts our costs, impacts quite a bit of our requirements associated with the farm. And that puts us at 2 minutes early from when I wanted me to finish. I guess I'll open this back up for questions.
So we'll go ahead and answer some of the questions that are in here, Jason. Okay. Were any of those 17 documented farms using a high plan of nutrition for heifers with restricted intake?
All right, so I'm not going to be able to fully answer that question as accurately as probably desired. At the calf group, a number of these farms were using free choice acidified milk feeding approaches where they could eat as much as they want, and they'll had higher dry matter intakes for those younger calves. For the older heifers, we did not analyze or capture if any of them were on a true restricted feeding where the feed bunk was emptied for a period of time or not. That was just not an area that we collected in the system. So I can't answer that part in terms of high plain nutrition on a true restricted feed system.
Okay. So in your analysis, the non-performing expense, did it account for age when the heifer left the system?
So to answer that question is yes. The farms look back over the last 12 months by pen of animals in their farm and said how many animals over the last 12 months were either sold as non-performance or died out of each pen. So now some of the farms had 5 pens, some of the farms had 12 pens, depending on their size and their strategy. So we had an idea of how many animals left at each pen. Then we could use that information to come up with an estimation based on the actual farm's cost numbers, how much they had invested in that animal when she left that particular pen. And if the animals were actually sold, they were also able to enter the beef value that they received for them when they did sell them.
One question I had here, as others are typing in questions, I noticed going through your analysis there that number of animals is critical.
Yeah.
It looked like it was one of the most critical things to start with when going through trying to look at a heifer enterprise and seeing where can you tweak it.
And it is, and the second part that goes hand in hand with that is what is our intent with raising the heifers? What's our plan to get the value back out of them? So if we have if we're growing, we're expanding, we're going to support other dairy growth, that can still work for us because we're capturing the value in that manner. If we're stable herd size, don't have a good method to capture that value, then that number becomes more critical.
The last question that is in here is it asks if this analysis is available online yet, if you have a write-up. And
so the parts of this study has been presented in at various conferences and CAF Congress the last 2 years here in New York. The final study of all the data has yet to be finalized and posted, and our goal here is to have that available here after the first of the year. That'll actually be the final write-up capturing all the analysis will be done, but at this point the total study is not yet online. So I did see one other question there on the pre-wean labor per number of heifers.
Oh, sorry.
So and so the question is, in the pre-wean labor per number of heifers, were any of these farms using automatic calf feeders? Or were they individually fed? So I partially answered that. I don't know, 17 farms, 10 of them were using some type of group housing feeding system, whether it was automatic calf feeders or acidified free choice systems, and the other 7 farms are individual pens in a barn or a hutch system. And that does lead to some of the variability in that labor number on those farms based on just what the facility was and what their feeding approach was and how that impacted labor. What was interesting, though, is that the hutch systems and the individual pen systems are kind of in the middle of the pack, and the high and the low labor efficiency farms are the ones that were the group housing system. So just because it was a group housing, group feeding system did not automatically guarantee lower labor or higher labor efficiency, lower labor costs.
Well, Jason, I want to thank you again for presenting this topic today. I think it's a very important topic, one that a lot of times we don't think about, especially when you think about it from the standpoint that 1/4 of the cost is associated with raising heifers. So with that, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for the invitation.